introduction. Please, can you see my slide, please?
Yes,
hello.
please. Clearly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Uzairue Leonard. I'm a faculty member at Federal University of here, and also the director for Center for Impact, AMR, and Policy Research. And also I co-found Research Hub Nigeria and also Frontier Lead Consulting. And I do a lot of work on systematic review and evidence synthesis generally. So my work here today is just to look at systematic review eligibility criteria. So disclosure, some of the information that I will be presenting here is part of the training I also received from other institutions. So in case you also went to the same training and you see some things from there so that you know that I didn't steal them, I was trained, so with permission to actually share from them too. Now, basically, a systematic review process from what we've been dealing with from the very beginning, have to do with preparation of slide and a lot of other stuff. So basically, then we move to search for and also selecting study for inclusion. So when we are talking about inclusion, that's when eligibility criteria comes in. So when we talk about eligibility criteria, we're talking about broad of several things, several of which we'll be looking at here, that we make your study to be great and also make the outcome that you are going to produce from your study to be reproducible and be free of bias. So some of the learning outcome that we look at here, just to look at to understand the role of study eligibility criteria, which have to do with inclusion and exclusion, framing a systematic review, and also to know when and how to set study eligibility criteria, then to understand the effect of study eligibility criteria on interpretation of review. Very, very important, because if you do not set very clear eligibility criteria, then when it comes to interpretation of a study that you've designed, then there will be a lot of issues that you will encounter, and most often the results will not be useful, so to say. Now, when we talk about study eligibility, now why do we actually look at how do we study eligibility criteria? Why can't we just do the way narrative review or just normal literature review we go on by pulling on as much as available evidences that they have? Now, eligibility criteria, first and foremost, we design which study or article you are to include in the systematic review. Then the next aspect is that it also ensures that literature reviews relevant, then reliability and validity. Now, the reliability of your study and the relevance of your study and its validity is based on the eligibility criteria that you've set. Now, another thing you also need to understand is that eligibility criteria will also minimize and increase transparency, because once you set eligibility criteria, then someone else can uptake that work and also do the same and produce similar results. Now, the next one is that it also functions the same in systematic review as in primary study. Just like when you want to do a primary study, you have to set the eligibility that will determine the inclusion of the subjects that you're going to include in your study. That's very essential. So that same way when you're designing your primary study, that it's pregnant women that I want to include, is adolescent of so and so age that will be included. All those will also come into play when you are doing systematic review. Now, the next is that it also reflects the analytic framework and key questions. Now, when you are designing your eligibility criteria, now the analytic framework that you're going to use and also the key questions that you are going to be answering basically will also form part of the eligibility that you're going to create. Now, knowing that, yes, for scopy review, for example, because we're talking about systematic review, but I also need to mention that the reason why I make the work key questions, because most often in scoping review, you have several questions that can actually form the outcome that you are looking for, that you use to arrive at the end point. But for systematic review, most often you end up asking just a single question, or at most maybe two questions together. Now, that's also very important. Those questions that you're answering will also form, is going to, some of the outcome or the question there, or the subject of the question will actually form the part of the inclusion, or that is going to define your eligibility criteria that you are going to set. Then the next one is that they are also very powerful tool for widening or narrowing the scope of a review. Yes. Now, if you want to widen a review, then you have to also widen the eligibility criteria. Now, if you want to narrow the scope of the review equally, you need to also narrow the eligibility criteria that you're going to. You need to widen the eligibility criteria. Why? If you want to widen the review, then you narrow the eligibility criteria. So it's also provide information to determine whether review can be combined or compared. Now, if the outcome you are seeing, they are not homogeneous. Now, based on your eligibility criteria, it's not possible for you to do a quantitative analysis in that aspect, which is the meta-analysis. But if they are homogeneous enough, then you'll be looking at doing a statistical aspect of the work, which is the systematic, which is the meta-analysis rather. Now, one of the first things that we need to look at is that some sample criteria that we need to look at. Now, for example, population type, for example, you'll be looking at adults. You know, there are several things that we're going to look at when we look at some framework as we proceed on this training. Now, you notice that for population-based studies, now you'll be looking at, are you talking about adults? Are you talking about community dwelling females or males, or children of certain age and the rest? Then the next one, you're looking at intervention, for example. You're looking at are you looking at screening tool, for example, to identify depression risks or cardiovascular risks or whatsoever risks you want to look at? Then the next thing is that country. Are you looking at multi-country, say, for example, West Africa countries, or just only Nigeria? Now, the next thing, you're also looking at settings. Are you looking at hospital-based studies or community-based studies? Then the next one you also look at, study population size. Now, you also be looking at, are you looking at samples that are greater or less than 200 or even less than that, the case may be. Now, the type of study that you're also going to be including, are you looking at randomized clinical trials or observational studies or cross-sectional studies, or all other type of study that you intend to include? So all of those are very essential for you to be able to set a very clear eligibility criteria. Now, another thing that we also want to look at, for example, using a broad criteria, we mean that you're going to be including as many studies as possible. Now, another thing is that it will also be helpful to explore what is known. But the result is that the result may become so cumbersome that too much literature will be not really flexible when it comes to the review at that instant. Then the next thing is that it could actually put in desperate literature that cannot be what compared. So that's what happens when you have a broad criteria set. Now, when you have a narrow criteria set, like I mentioned, you are likely to have homogeneous literatures. You can have a reduced sample of literatures to a manageable scope. Then also it could be appropriate for a narrow research question. Then it will also reduce it may reduce applicability of the review and sometimes risk introducing bias. That's what happens when it's too narrow too, because just imagine you are only, especially high journal literatures, for example, published in high impact journals. Most often we report positive outcome, but there might be some studies that may not make up all to those some of those areas, those journals, or even some database that could actually help you to reduce bias towards just positivity aspect only. Then if you narrow your criteria too much, then you will miss out some of those literatures, and by so doing, you will end up having errors in your study. Now, we want to look at redefining criteria. Now, when we talk about redefining criteria, what we are saying basically is that when you are to choose, when choosing how broad or narrow to set criteria, it requires a balance of obtaining adequate information. Very, very important, so that you'll be able to answer your question without actually obstructing or disrupting the result with irrelevant literature. Very essential. Then the next one is that the review team should work together to find this balance. Now, that's why for literature, for systematic review, one individual cannot sit down and actually do a systematic review. It has to be combination of efforts. The reason being that during the process of review of literature, there might be some literatures that you might deem fit that meet your inclusion criteria, while the second review or the third reviewer may say no. Now, when it comes to that point, now there is need for you to have a third breaker, or to break the tie, to look at, okay, present why you think it should be included, why you present why this should not be. Then we'll look at it together, then consensus will be reached, and as so doing, all eligible study will be included. Now, looking at bias in this context, what we are talking about is that distortion of the estimate of effect that come from how studies are selected for inclusion is very important, because when this is done in a way that is not applicable, what happens is that it will affect the applicability or the external validity of the review itself, and by so doing, it will not be useful. Now, we are going to look at some example of context of, for example, for eligibility criteria. Now, inappropriate eligibility criteria may limit applicability of the review. We've mentioned that. An example is the use of study of twin pregnancy in the review of preterm labor management for low-risk women. Now, that will be, you'll be introducing bias in that sense, because for twin pregnancy, you can't associate the risk that is associated with that is actually different from a pregnancy that is just one. So by so doing, you have to have a criteria that will actually eliminate those kind of pregnancy that might even have higher risks compared to those that are mono, that are just one pregnancy. Now, the next one is eligibility criteria may result in the inclusion of more of a study type, a certain study type that neither overestimate or underestimate effectiveness. So that's also another drawback of eligibility criteria. Now, we want to look at, now in selecting criteria, there are some things that we need to look at. You look at the review, review study goals, then you assess analytic framework and key question, which we are going to look at in a few slides from now. Then you set criteria before beginning the abstract review. Very, very important. Now, this is an example of a framework, for example. we have population, which could be condition, disease severity or stage, then comorbidity or patient demographic. Then we have intervention. We're looking at dosage, frequency, method of administration. Then we have comparator. Are you looking at treatment plus compared to placebo? Then usual care or standard care or a new care or active control or so many other comparators there. Then outcome, you're looking at health outcome, morbidity, mortality, quality of life, and so many other things. Then you're also looking at timing. For example, timing of follow-up. If it's a study that has to do with clinical trial, for example, drug trial, you need to look at, okay, the quality, the number of the amount of time that it took for them to follow up before the endpoint was reached in the as defined in the study. Then the next one is that setting. Also, you need to look at, okay, are we looking at primary specialist or inpatient or counter intervention as the case may be in this case. Now let's look at case examples. Now for population, for example, we are looking at, okay, research question would be that does vitamin C supplementation reduce the incidence of common cold in adults? Now, the eligibility criteria for population in this case now can be said to be adults age 18 to 65. That's example of a population-based criteria, eligibility criteria. Now, when you go to intervention criteria, for example, now you need to look at this research question. Does a specific diet plan improve weight loss in obese individuals? Now, the eligibility criteria here for intervention will be specific diet plan. Example, when you're talking about Mediterranean diet, vegetarian, or any other type of diet as the case may be. Then the next type of question eligibility that we can also have is that when we talk about comparison. Now, the research question that could introduce such should be, does drug A outperform drug B in reducing blood pressure, for example? So in this case, the eligibility criteria for comparison would be that drug B as the comparator, while drug A is actually the treatment in this case. Then the outcome, example of an outcome question that could lead to eligibility should also be, does exercise enhance quality of life in cancer survivors? Now, the eligibility criteria for such outcome will be, primary outcome will be quality of life for cancer patients that undergo exercises as compared to those that do not, as the case may be. So for this eligibility criteria now, even though the individual undergo exercises, but if they are not in respect to quality of life, it's not eligible. So the quality of life there has to be primary outcome that you are looking at. If that's not the case, then the such article will not be eligible. The next question is that concerning study design is acupuncture effective in managing chronic pain? Now, the eligibility criteria now would be that it has to be study, it has to be clinical trial only. So any observational study or cross-sectional study that is not clinical trial will not be eligible for such study. Then time frame. Now, this has to do with a research question, for example, that what is the trend in air pollution level over the past decade? So in this case, we'll be looking at eligibility criteria for time frame. Study published between, let's say, 2010 to 2020. So in any study, for example, where you see there is a time frame introduced, such study will be using a study frame or a study conceptual framework or that have to include time frame with it, whether it will be PICOT or whatsoever framework that will be. Once year is introduced or period is introduced or time frame is introduced, then automatically we are looking at a protocol or protocol design that will have to use a certain framework that includes time frame. So other consideration for setting up criteria would be what study design should be included, like I mentioned. Include study in foreign language. If you are including study in foreign language, meaning that there will be need for an interpreter or an interpreter, not a Google translator. And I need to really serve this as for us to note, because there was a review I was looking at some time ago. They said they use a Google translator to translate paper published in other language. You know, automatically that you cannot vouch for the, especially clinical studies. There will be a lot of destruction of information that Google might have introduced, and as such, there will be an issue with it. So include, study conducted in other countries but published in English. Yes. For example, study can be done in, let's say, in China, but it was published in English language. That can be introduced. Then another thing is that the issue of gray or fugitive literature is also very important, because there are a lot of information studies that are published as dissertation that are not in journals, but are published in databases or repository of universities or organizations. So there is need for you to also, when you are searching, to most times search gray literature to make sure that there is all necessary information are available. You're able to pull all of them together to arrive at something very important. So another thing is also include the year of study. So that will inform you if you are doing time frame kind of study, whether it will be eligible or not. Then the next is type of study to be included. Like I mentioned, limitation of the randomized control triad. Of a randomized control trial. So in this case, if that happens, automatically it will affect what your outcome is going to be. Then the next one is that, are you going to include observational study? If so, what specific types? Then what is the value of case series in what you are looking at? Then the next thing is, how is the definition of case series operationalized? It's very important, because if you are going to be introducing case series, you need to define what are the definitions of what case series means in that particular study, so that there won't be issue. Now, for observational studies, there are 4 major types of observational study. It could be cohort with comparison, could be case controls, then it could be case series, then it could also be registry or database kind of study. So you need to note all this so that when you are designing your inclusion and exclusion criteria, you know which you are going to include or exclude. Okay, I think I've spoken more about this. Not English. Okay. Okay, I've spoken. Okay. I think, okay, this is where I want us to come to. Now, for first exercise, exercise 1, for example, now, this was part of a study, a training I also received. So now, if you look at this, say, what would you do if you were asked to review the literature on transition support for adolescents with autism spectrum disorder who are entering adulthood? Now, before saying the key question, now consider the category of criteria that you will want to apply. Now, looking at this study now, you will have to determine what the population is, what the your intervention will be, then what your control, if any, will be, then what your outcome is going to be. So those are what we actually form your question. So this, for example, for a PICO question now would be, what is the relevant population? What is the intervention of interest? To what exposure is the intervention being compared? Now, what outcomes are relevant? Now, what short-term or long-term outcomes could be considered? Then the next is that in what setting would the result be applicable? So that's also very essential. Now, this is what this would be for that particular type of question. The first will be what constitutes an adolescent. Now, what constitutes a diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder? So you need to know what those mean before you now look, okay, how is transition support defined in this sense? Because if they want to transit into adulthood, now there should be a support system that is required. So in that case, they will be required to be able to, that support will be available for them to be able to transit into adulthood. Then the next one, do we compare to no transition support or direct compare types of support? That will also be defined by the researcher in this case. So the next would be that what are the goals for adolescents with ASD, or are they transition to as they transit to adulthood? So you also look at, okay, what is the goal? That will be your outcome. So as they are transiting from this stage to this stage, so what the expectation and what is based on the goal that will actually determine the kind of support that you're going to give to them. So how quickly should the outcome be apparent? That's another thing. Timing is also important. Are we looking at, okay, they are supported for 6 months, supported for 1 year, comparing, okay, those that are supported for 6 months compared to those that are supported for 1 year, or those supported for 1 year compared to those supported for 2 years. Those are time frame issues. Then the next one is translation support provided in multiple settings, such as in schools, in clinics, or in the community. So these are variables that you need to put in as you move forward. Now, like we mentioned here, what would you do with a study that includes individuals over 10 years of age? Now we're talking about adulthood. Now, if you are including a study of 10 years, you're already introducing bias, because 10 years is not yet adolescent, it's not yet transiting to adulthood. So as such, there will be bias introduction. Then the next one is a paper about an intervention for individual with a range of developmental disabilities, not only autism. So you also need to know, okay, are you looking at only individuals that have issue with autism, or those that have other type of disorder? So if they have other type of disorder, how do you treat that kind of study? The next is a study of children with Asperger syndrome, but not other form of ASD. So you also need to know, that's why most time when you are designing this kind of study, you need someone, for example, looking at autism, you need somebody from clinical psychology, you need somebody from clinical, from medicine, then you need people from psychology, and so many other disciplines to be able to actually put such study together. So the next one is that actually there are no right answer to all of this. So that's why in the end, you will not determine, okay, are you going to just do only evidence synthesis without quantitative analysis, or just only qualitative analysis without quantitative analysis? Based on the homogeneity of the data that you got, we actually determine your next point. Then we've already looked at this. Okay, in conclusion, okay, yes, review protocol should specify eligibility criteria in detail. So that's why, for example, if I'm to review a literature, a protocol for a journal to publish for a systematic review, what I will be looking at for is actually specifying what the eligibility criteria. So even though every other aspect of the work is well done, if there is no clear how the eligibility criteria is going to be determined, that paper, that protocol will not go through, to be returned back to the author to look at. Then the next one, criteria may need to be adapted during the review process.
Hello, everybody.
Eyes, and then made it very interesting. But I would want you to do one thing that would be more practical. you know, when you were giving examples, giving the criteria for each component, how we can assess the eligibility for each of the components for the PCOT framework. You used different research questions. Now it would be more practical if you could use one research question, and then we can assess the eligibility criteria for each of the components. That would be that would be wonderful if we can do that as an example. One research question, and then we assess the eligibility criteria for each of the components. Yeah. Thank you. I hope you understand that.
Okay. Yeah, noted.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Shall I go ahead with it, or we take some pool of questions, then I respond to them?
Yeah, Mr. Leonard, I think we can take one response per question, so the questions don't accumulate, please.
Okay. Please, can you just take me to the slide on when I talked about the vitamin? That should be just on. No, yes. Go back. Go back. Yes, this fine. No, back. Yeah. So now, if we are to, let's assume here, using this particular study, the first question here, does vitamin C supplement reduce the incidence of common cold in adults? Now, here, the population, we already know that the population here will be, we're looking at adults. Adults who probably have, here, it will be adults who had cold, or those, depending on the way the study is designed. Now, for the population, we'll be looking at adults here, because we are looking, the question is talking about adults. That would be 18 to 65, as the case may be. Now, when we are talking about intervention, then the intervention here will be vitamin C supplement. So, even though they are adults, but if they are not if there is no introduction of what is it called, vitamin C.
Vitamin C supplement.
Yeah, supplement to them, then they won't be eligible. Now, the next point will be the intervention. I've spoken concerning the intervention. Then will be the comparator. Now, the comparator here will be those without supplements. Now, if it's kind of a case control study or a clinical trial study, they have to be treatment, they have to be placebo. So the placebo now will be either those without vitamin C or with another type of maybe standard treatment or whatsoever it is, or standard meal or meal without supplement, as the case may be. Then the outcome here will be, we'll be looking at, okay, reduction or absence or reduce occurrences of what's it called, of cold. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Are you hearing me? So that will be that. Then I think the next one now will be time frame. So the time frame now will be, are we looking at, okay, are we going to look at studies that the follow-up period? Now, the supplementation, does it have effect? Is it time bound, in the sense that, okay, for those that take it for 6 months, how is the effect different from those that took it for 1 year? And how is it different for those that took it for so period? That is one aspect. Then the next one could be follow up. Okay, after you took the supplement, did we have to follow you up for 6 months, 5 months, and the case? Then I think the last one will be X, which is the study design. So that would be, are we including observational studies or not? Or we are just going to include only clinical trial studies? So I don't know if that has answered your question, Ma.
Yeah.
Please, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Leonard, she says very well. Please, do we
Okay.
have the hand? David, you can go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Okay. It's just that I'm John Davidson from Nigeria. It's just that I'm very excited and elated at the delivery, the composure, the precision, how the delivery was done. In fact, I can gather people and teach them on this particular topic the way it was delivered. I just want to say thank you because I'm so happy about it. Using these examples to bring out the people component is fair. And every other presenter, they are all fair. But using examples like this, we make the thing sink even to the layman. So I just want to say thank you, great guy. You are very great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the amazing feedback. All right, Oscar Betsy, please let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. My observation so far is when I began my academic research, I realized that writing inclusion and exclusion criteria, I did it more than 10 times before it was accepted. And I was expecting, sir, whether Mr. Leonard can do the opposite side, which is the exclusion criteria, because I don't know whether it is the opposite of the inclusion criteria based on systematic research system. So that was what I was actually expecting, the exclusion part of. So if you can make one example for me to see whether it's the opposite of the inclusion criteria, I'll be very grateful, sir. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Leonard. Please, did you get that? Hello, Mr. Leonard.
Okay, please, can you hear me?
Very well now.
Okay. So I was saying that most often people miss thought that exclusion is the opposite of exclusion. Sorry, exclusion is the opposite of inclusion in systematic review, but that's not absolutely correct. Now, if I'm to use if I'm to use the same example I used, if I'm to use the same example I used, I'm trying to go back to the slides. Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm trying to look at that. I'm not seeing yours. Okay, let me see. Okay. Okay, yeah, good. So I'm saying that if I want to use this same example now, okay, let's go back to okay, let's leave this let's even use this let's use this particular question. Does drug A perform drug B in reducing blood pressure? Now let's assume that the inclusion will be very easy to set. Now the exclusion here will be, now any study, for example, looking at population now we are looking at, assuming is also adults we are looking at. So any study that does not that looked at this particular outcome in children, for example, will not be accepted. That's one. Then the next thing is the intervention itself. Now, looking at the intervention, you will see that we are looking at drug A and drug B. Now, for the drug A, in this sense, sorry, for the drug A can be now based on the intervention. If a particular study uses drug A, but remember we are talking in comparison with drug B. Now, if it uses drug A but do not compare it to drug B, then automatically you cannot include that study. Now, the next one is also that if a particular study uses, it also uses drug A, but compare with another study, with another drug rather, it's not also eligible. Or another study uses drug C and compare with drug B is not also eligible for that. Or even the same drug, they use drug B, compare with drug B, but where the outcome was not blood pressure. So as such, it's not also eligible for that study. Now, if you also has concluded or during your review that or protocol design that okay is only clinical trials you are going to include, then any other study that is done that is not there, you don't include it. Then another exclusion will be that any study that is done, for example, that is not written in English will not be included. But if you are if you have interpreters, then you can include that, someone that will be able to interpret the data. But if you don't have interpreter, then automatically that will also be excluded, because you using other softwares that are not humans to interpret or to interpret them, we actually introduce bias. So basically there are a lot of, even based on time frame too, if you are looking at time frame, any study outside the time frame too is not acceptable. Any study outside the study design too is not acceptable. Then there are a lot of other things too that you also look at. Now, you look at probably under the population. If you say adults are going to be taken, now, like the autism we looked at just now, if it's only autism you are looking at, now, what if someone have autism and have another learning disorder? Automatically, that you didn't include that you're going to do a study that include that with other learning disorder. So automatically that will actually be an issue that you have to remove such study, because automatically it will introduce bias in the very outcome. So they are not directly opposite each other. Now, there are a lot of other things that because of time we may not be able to touch here. Thank you.
Hello, do we have any other hand raised? A lot. Adebe.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Ababa from Ethiopia. I have a couple of questions, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
The first question is about sample size. As one of the inclusion criteria, it was mentioned that some 200 and more are taken as cutoff point, but in randomized controlled trials, usually we can't have adequate sample size.
Yeah,
so
I know that was coming.
Can we?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I understand what your question is. So yeah, I'll just yes, that's one. So quickly, let me respond to that.
Okay.
That was just an example, not that is a criteria. So what I'm saying is that it may not be for randomized clinical trial, like you rightly said. For clinical randomized trial, control trial, it's very difficult for you to find studies that even have up to 200. Although, yeah, there are some that have quite a lot of population size. What I was trying to say there is that when you are setting criteria, maybe for conventional, what is it called, cross-sectional study or observational study, as the case may be, cohort study. Now, if you set a criteria that, okay, the sample size is also going to be part of your criteria, and you therefore say that, okay, that there is, you want to, you are going to, that any study that does not have up to so and so sample number, so that it will reduce the standard error, especially if you are going to be doing meta-analysis. In this case, if you are doing meta-analysis, no sample size will have effect on the final outcome, because if you have a particular study that reports, let's say 2,000 population, then you now have another study that reported just only, let's say 200. You know, when you look at them on the forest plot, funnel plot, you will see that their dispersion is going to be at variance with each other, and most often bias will be introduced. So it's usually when designing those kind of studies, they will advise that you remove those with very extreme low or extreme high sample size to minimize possible error that could come in. That was what I was trying to put in, not for randomized clinical trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other question I had is, you know, in this meta-analysis, critical appraisal and assessing the quality of the papers is very important.
Yes.
So do we consider this quality of papers as inclusion criteria, or how do you see that? Why I'm raising this is because we need to
quality, yes. If you look at if you look at quality assessment, basically, most often, to some extent, eligibility criteria actually comes in a way. Now, when I mean in a way, is that very often you will see that they will ask about the population, they will ask about the study design, they will ask about the participant recruitment and all of that. But we cannot really say they are not really eligibility criteria. But most often, they also form part of eligibility, because when you have to design your eligibility criteria, population will have to come in, intervention will have to come in, whether comparison or not will also come in. But you can't actually say that eligibility criteria is part of quality assessment or risk assessment, just plainly. But looking at it in depthly, you will know that yes, to some extent, what you have talked about in eligibility criteria, you will end up also measuring it to some extent when you are answering the questions. You know, quality assessment are usually question-based kind of questions. Okay, with this yes or no, or unclear, all those kind of things. So to some extent, you will still find those outcome or those parts in quality assessment. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. We have some persons joining on YouTube. Do we have any question on YouTube, please?
Yes. The question goes, please, how will you determine the reliability of the gray literature you want to include in your study?
Okay.
Mr. Leonard, please, did you get that?
Yes. And it was asking, how do we what?
How will you determine the reliability of the gray literature you want to include in your study?
Okay, that's fine. Now, for gray literature, there's also way you also assess their reliability rather. Now, for dissertation, for example, yes, for dissertation, for example, most publications that are published are usually gotten from whether dissertation or full text research as they be. Almost all the components that make a review article reliable is also what you are going to assess a grey literature, especially when we are talking about, let's say, thesis, for example. Now, we need to understand that when we are talking about grey literature, you know that even the grey literature too, you have to subject them to review process. You have to check their abstract, check their title, check their abstract, and check the content too. So those checking during the process of article review, or yes, you also pass the grey literature through those processes. So as such, there is no how you will there's no how you will not also be able to determine the reliability, just the way you determine the reliability of other study. But also knowing that depending on the kind of analysis you are going to do, there are tools too that you can also use to determine, based on the component of the study, if they are reliable or they are not. But if it's just systematic review without meta analysis, for example, you also pass them through the normal quality assessment that you pass every other paper through. Thank you.
I think that's all for the YouTube participants. I don't know if we on site. Please say hands.
Okay, Mr. Leonard, please, we have questions from on-site participants. Could you please tell us how many more minutes you have so we know how we're regulating the questions?
I'm actually, I may have to even, probably I can spare maybe the next 10 okay. minutes.
Okay. Thank you, that works.
Yes, hi. I'd like to clarify about the time frame.
Okay.
If you're considering a cross-sectional study.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Would the time frame be when the paper was published, or because the explanation, I think the explanation was
no,
that
it's not when the paper was published, when the study was done, because there are studies that were done in 2015 that just got to press. So as such, it's not, that's why you must have to download the full text of every article that you want to include. You have to know if your inclusion criteria includes the time frame, you will not be looking at the year of publication. It's actually when the study was done. So that's another clarification where most people actually miss it.
So for the longitudinal study, then it would be the length of the study, because that's the explanation we got.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question.
Thank you so much. Now about the time frame.
Yes.
How big? I mean, how big should the time frame be? For example, you give an example from 2010 to 2020. It's like what is the acceptable time frame? Secondly,
okay, go on.
Secondly, if I'm considering a time frame that is including the current year, like 2023, maybe from 2010 to 2023, is it acceptable?
20 what? Sorry, 20.
A time frame that is including the current year. Maybe I'm looking at from the year period from 2010 to 2023.
Okay.
Is it acceptable? I will pay for.
No, if you have to state, okay, like the first question is what time frame is too short or too lengthy. Now, usually depending on the how recent the evidence you are trying to put together is. For example, Now, if you are looking at the last 10 years, let's say research on the, let's say from 2005 to 2010, for example, you are looking at diagnostic on diabetes. You know, that kind of study is of no importance, except you are looking at historic evolution of how diagnostic in diabetes has evolved. But if you're going to be looking at reliability or importance or how effective they are, the more recent your review is, the better, especially if it's an evolving area. But if it's not an evolving area, when I mean evolving area, a field that, for example, let's say every 3 months, new things are coming up in that particular area, it shouldn't be more than 10 years, but some will say 20 years. But the second question you asked was, okay, if, for example, you can have a time frame of 2010 to 2023. Now, if you are to include 2023, you must state the month where that ends. And that's when it comes in when your search. So you need to state, okay, when 2023 do your search, because we are still in 2023, we've not ended 2023. So you need to specify when in 2023 your time frame will be, because you can't just make it 2023. 2023 will still end by December. So as such, you cannot just, you have to include the date, the particular month in that case. Is that clear? Hello? Hello?
Yes, please.
Mr. Leonard, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Please, my question goes like this. As a novice researcher, how do you know that you have exhausted your literature when you are reviewing literature? And the second question is that when you are reviewing literature, is there any standard way on how you arrange your literature? Sometimes you see people emphasize you do it deductively or inductively.
Okay, thank you. Although we are not looking at literature review, but when you want to, especially if you are probably, I'm sure, certainly maybe you are doing a doctoral or a master program. So your supervisor will ask you to do a literature review. Now, basically, how you do literature review is that, when you go to database and you search, or since it's not a systematic review, you just get currency of new information. Now, most often, depending on the field you are, you have to arrange the literatures that you've gotten based on similarities. So let's assume literature ABC talks about the methods, the accuracy of the method of the particular condition you are looking at. Then literature 7, 8, 9, 10 talks about the treatment. So you need to pull them together. And in pulling them together, then you now look at, okay, even though literature ABCD talks about method, does literature AB, let's say literature AB supports a particular method? Okay, that this method is good, this method is accurate, it has been validated and do all of such. Then let's say literature CD gave a negative review particular about that method, or a method of identifying that condition. So you have to look at another thing. You also need to understand your assessor or your supervisor, the kind of person he is. So that will determine whether you're going to be reviewing inductively or deductively, depending on the person he is. Then the way you can know this, to go back to his former literatures or his former publications, then to sort to see, okay, how does he write? So as such, that we help you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. I think we can just take 2 questions online. None on YouTube yet, so we have 3 hands raised. Please, if No, if Yoma has spoken already, Promise, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I'm grateful for your time, and it's been very educating. I'm trying to write a particular paper, and the challenge I have now is that I'm trying to talk about the non-pharmacological management intervention in the management and prevention of type 2 diabetes. But I've gotten to a point where my research question is how to measure the effectiveness of the non-pharmacological intervention in the management of type 2 diabetes. And I'm asking myself, how will I measure that intervention? Because if I'm talking about nutrition and maybe physical exercise, as against those who are just taking medication, pharmacological intervention, how will I be able to measure it? Because if I'm going to do a systematic review, I don't know if the literature they gathered was a primary one or it was a secondary one they also put together. So my challenge is, how do I measure the effectiveness of this? Thank you, sir. Do you understand my question, sir?
I do
Thank
very
you.
well.
Thank you very much, sir.
Now, before you even go ahead,
yes, sir,
to do your search,
yes, sir,
you must define what your outcome is going to be. Are you with me? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know about her.
Okay. So when starting a systematic review, you must define from the very onset what your outcome is going to be, because that is what is going to determine your search terms that you're going to design and all of that. Because if you just, like you mentioned, no pharmaceutical interventions. Now, what aspect of what outcome are you looking at? Are you looking at their blood sugar level? Are you looking at, okay, they are reduced visit to the clinic? I hope you are hearing me. Reduced visit to the clinic, reduce number of insulin intake, occurrence of reduction in other comorbidity like hypertension and the rest. No, those are some of, you need to define what the outcome is. Are you because once people hear about diabetes, the next thing is sugar level. So you need to define, are you going to be looking at, okay, this non-pharmaceutical outcome based on their the relationship with their sugar level or their relationship with the quality of life that they now have? Do they visit hospital more regular or less regular? Do they have to reduce their insulin intake and all of that? So those are some of the outcomes that you could look at, but you need to define. You can't look at all the outcomes together. They have to be one specific outcome you are looking at. That's what makes systematic review different from a scoping review, basically. So you need to also be sure, are you going to do a scoping review or you want to do a systematic review? So that's also very essential. I hope that answers your question. Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. There are a couple of questions in the chat box, but I'm not sure we can take them now. So,
because of time.
So we are sharing a link to the question box. So please just indicate the session that your question is for, and then post your question there. We'll be able to attend to them. Mr. Leonard, please, you have final words for us.
So I just want to appreciate the community and all the organizers for finding me worthy to be part of the training. And I look forward to working with several of us. I know myself and Ifyong, we have a lot of things in our pipeline that we are developing. So very soon we'll also be reaching out, and we look forward to collaborating with other organizations to bring more of such training to Africans and especially developing country in general. So thank you, and God bless you.
Mr. Leonard, please, could you share your email address?
Okay. Okay, I will just put that on this chat box so everyone can see it.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We will be running up for today. Can you hear me, please? Hello, can you hear me? Oh, okay, awesome. All right, so we'll be running up for today. We have looked at an introduction to meta-analysis, developing a topic and research questions, and now Mr. Leonard has given a powerful presentation on eligibility criteria. So we have shared the slides, and we have shared the quiz for a session, and we have also shared the task to our emails. So the task for Mr. Leonard's session is to develop an eligibility criteria, and we strongly recommend that you develop eligibility criteria with the topic you had submitted earlier. So we had shared 2 tasks today. The tasks are different from the quizzes. They are going into different places. So the quizzes is, they are just to assess your understanding of the sessions. But then the tasks might potentially be developed into systematic reviews. And we may be giving feedbacks on these tasks tomorrow. So please, we recommend that you provide eligibility criteria for the topic and research question that you had submitted already. We'll be sharing all the recordings and everything for today to your email to this evening, just before tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be looking at the systematic literature search, and we are looking at making it very engaging. We're looking at screening and data extraction. And we're also looking at quality assessment and risks of bias assessment tomorrow. So the facilitators tomorrow are Prof. Alison Kinyengere, Prof. Khan, and Dr. Kwaro Obuka. Please let us know if you have any challenge. We are very active on all our platforms, email, WhatsApp, Twitter, anyway, just let us know if you have any challenge. I will be responding as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.